Hi, I'm Atomicus from OWKings.com, and today I'll talk about Pharah on defense for King's Row. Anything from team compositions to different engagement angles and whatnot. As of yet, Pharah works against certain compositions, primarily ones that don't have that many hitscan heroes such as McCree, Widowmaker, and Soldier 76. Before we continue, make sure you check out the main guide for Pharah, since I'll skip the basic stuff about her in this video. King's Row is a map where Pharah can dominate if she can't get contested. There are plenty of spots that can give her the high ground advantage and enough flanking routes to make her a pain to deal with if played properly. In this video, I'll just focus on the defense side, but the same key areas and spots can be used on offense as well. First of all, I'll talk about the comps that help Pharah the most on this map. The standard King of the Hill dive comp can be used on this map as well. Zarya, Winston, Genji, Ana, and Lucio or Zen can easily help Pharah secure the needed kills on any hitscan heroes that might contest her. I've added Zen in the mix because of the recent Lucio changes. Zen can potentially help much more than Lucio can in the end, especially on non-King of the Hill maps. Replacing Zarya with a Tracer can also work if you feel strong about your DPS players. This is a comp that is very strong against poke comps, the ones that include snipers. This is usually a common opening comp on King's Row since you can snipe all the way from the upper area of the spawn. The other comp that is usually used on hybrid and payload maps involves Reinhardt, Soldier 76, Zarya or Roadhog, Ana, and Zen or Lucio. This comp is more about winning the shield battles and dealing damage from afar as Pharah. You can still engage if you have a Lucio, but you'll usually be alone if you decide to flank. Now keep in mind that you should consider your options based on your current comp, and that throughout the match you'll have to adopt a different approach for each point, as the enemy team might swap their team composition to something different to potentially counter you. Moving on to the first point, as you can see, there are several areas that offer a high ground advantage, and as much as you're probably tempted in using all of them, it's best to stay away from the ones closer to the enemy spawn. The reason is because of what I said earlier, the fact that you'll encounter snipers very often when it comes to the first point on King's Row. Because of this, there are just a few spots that you'll be able to use as Pharah when it comes to defending this point. You should check the enemy comp very often here to make sure you don't get caught by a Widowmaker from their spawn. As long as they don't have any hitscan heroes to contest Pharah, you can fly around as much as you want. So there's two main options for holding this point. First, you can do it passively from these spots. You can use this to just spam at the main choke point and potentially break the enemy shield if they have a Reinhardt, and then continue poking at them as they push in. The other option is hiding aggressively either in the cinema or in the back alley, and then wait for the enemy team to push in before engaging them. You can use this if you already decided together with your team to fight around the statue or in the main choke point. This strategy will work best against poke compositions since you won't allow them to slowly push towards the point while cornering you with any snipers. When it comes to engaging from above the point, best way of doing this is by flying around the hotel while approaching the statue and using it as cover. You'll need your team to engage as you fly, so you hopefully don't get picked off immediately. The space around the statue isn't much to work with, but it can give you a window for regaining fuel jet and can offer you a bit of cover if you're close to dying. If they have a Widowmaker or Soldier 76, in this case you'll want to use the clock tower as cover and then close the gap towards them by using your concussive blast as a speed boost and hopefully take them out alone. It's risky, but otherwise you won't be able to help your team that much. Overall, when it comes to this point, you want to take it easy in the beginning and assess what comp the enemy team has before making any moves on the enemy team. For the next area, it's very important to hold the high ground as much as you can. This area above the archway can allow you to poke and scout the enemy team very easily without risking much, especially if they can contest it easily. You want your team to hold close to the arc in this case so you can keep the enemy team in the choke point as much as possible. Throughout the rest of the path that leads towards the second point, you'll want to keep in mind this area for whenever you want to flank, especially if you have your barrage up. Don't forget about the small platform that you can use, and remember that Ana can heal you if you're sitting at the edge of the window here. Use this to your advantage while you're holding this area. Once the enemy team pushes further in, you'll have a new playground to enjoy. This area is fantastic for Pharah due to the fact that you can fly over most of the buildings here, and that the main road is essentially a choke point. At this point in the match, the team fights will happen around these corners, so you'll have to position yourself in a way that will allow you to flank properly. There are several spots that can help you achieve that. First of all, we've got the previous area that leads above the archway. You can easily get behind the enemy team as they're fighting around the first corner. You can use your concussive blast to boost yourself towards the enemy team to close the gap if needed. Another spot that you can use, primarily for just spamming across the main road, is this high ground next to the bar. From here you can either go through the back alley to flank or just fly above the bar and fight from above this area. Yet another passive spot where you can shoot at the enemy team as they go around the corner is this window. This is more of a safe spot since you can retreat easily if things go south throughout the entire fight. Moving on to the second corner, for this area you will be primarily flying above the bar and using it as a flanking route for almost every team fight. This will easily allow you to get behind the enemy as your team engages them on the main road. You can also hide near the window I talked about earlier and surprise them with a barrage if you have it at the ready. Holding near the stairs here can also help you have a high ground advantage over the enemy team, especially if you have Ana that can heal you from the other end of the road. When it comes to the last part of the area that leads to the second point, the catwalk will be your main area for holding this point. You can use the building for cover if needed, and having a high ground advantage is always nice to have as Pharah. You can cover multiple paths from here without exposing yourself too much to enemy fire. You can also hold above the entrance to the subway station, however there isn't any cover to use here, so you can easily get poked from the main road or from the left area, so keep this in mind. So yeah, when it comes to the second point, the strongest area for Pharah is the one that allows you to fly over the bar to easily flank the enemy team. This is where you'll be able to influence the match the most for this part of the map. Use all the spots that I've shown you accordingly to what the enemy team has in store. Also, don't forget about the right side alley when you're holding on the catwalk, so your team doesn't get flanked easily. Now it's time to cover the last stretch for this map, starting off with the next corner where most team fights will happen. Here we have two spots that you want to use as much as possible. The main one is this small area which allows you to spam the main area as the enemy team is pushing in. You can use this crate for cover, and ideally you want to hold this high ground here as much as possible, especially if they can't contest it. From here you can also use your concussive blast to push some enemies off the map through this gap. The other spot that you'll use is this window-like gap that can help you flank the enemy team during team fights. This path can be really strong if you have the barrage up, since you can also just go up the stairs and on the catwalk to go even deeper behind enemy lines. Be careful not to stick too much to this area, especially if they have any heroes who can climb up here, since there isn't much space to work with and you can accidentally kill yourself from self-damage. Next up, we've got the last corner, which leads to the last point for this map. You basically have two main areas where you'll be holding out for this part. There's this high ground which gives you enough cover from any enemies that are on the low ground and allows you to be a pain by dealing damage from above. You can also retreat to this area if you're getting pressured too much while holding on the previous area that I've mentioned. Remember that you can drop from here and flank through the lower part of this area, though you need to be careful not to get caught since you won't be able to fly anywhere with so little free space. Speaking of the previous area that I've talked about, you can still use this spot specifically because it allows you to get behind the enemy really fast. In this case, going for the backline is ideal since this is where you'll find Ana or most hitscan heroes if they have any. This is the best path for flanking at this stage since it offers you cover and also the high ground advantage. When it comes to respawning, you don't really want to fight above the point since it puts you in the open, so you should only do this as a last resort for contesting the payload. Ideally, you want to get back in the spots I mentioned earlier and pick off any key targets from there. In terms of using your barrage, flanking and using it from behind is your best bet, and I've talked about plenty of spots that will let you accomplish that. As always, ideally you want to combine it with a Reinhardt, Zarya or Mei ulti if these are available. So that's King's Row, a map that favors Pharah if played right, but if you end up getting heavily contested on the high ground, remember to consider swapping to a different hero to help your team. Hopefully you have learned some new things and you can use most of the same tips on attack as well. With that in mind, this brings us to the end of another guide for Pharah. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time. Take care.